Welcome everyone to Appstinence, Less Screen Time, More Green Time. My name is Devin Cowens and I'm the events manager here at the Children in Nature Network. I'm glad you all are here and thank you for supporting our work. Today I'm joining you from the Muskogee Creek Nation, today known as Atlanta, Georgia. We invite you to share the native land that you are on in the chat. If you're not familiar with the history of your location, you can learn about Indigenous territories and the land with the native land map shown here on the screen. We'll post a link in the chat. There are some ways to support Indigenous peoples every day. You can learn about Indigenous homelands that you reside on, educate yourself on Indigenous issues, amplify Indigenous voices via social media and other ways, and support Indigenous causes and businesses. A few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is enabled for this event, and we have enabled the chat for all attendees, so feel free to comment and ask questions for Gabriella during this presentation, especially while she's discussing the approaches, because there'll be some, I think, applicable areas to discuss while she's chatting. So I'm thrilled to be here today and to have Gabriella Wynn speaking with us. Gabriella Wynn is the Gen Z founder of the Appstinence movement, a Gen Z social movement calling for us to walk away from our personal social media accounts, replacing it with direct line communication and in-person interaction. Rather than relying on digital detoxes, algorithm hacking, and superficial tips and tricks that keep us on social media platforms, the abstinence movement calls for a lasting and comprehensive solution to the seemingly inescapable attention economy, opting out. The movement began as a student organization at Harvard, where Gabriella has recently graduated, and has grown to include members on all continents except Antarctica, and almost all living generations. Participants of the abstinence lifestyle come from all walks of life, from college students to comedians, entrepreneurs to software engineers. In addition to being praised by voices such as Jonathan Haidt and Ariana Huffington, the movement has been featured by the New York Times, Business Insider, Harvard Ed, Wired, Newsweek, and various outlets across the globe. Personally, I've had a few millennial friends adopt this concept of abstinence, so I'm excited to learn from Gabriella firsthand about this movement and more about her background. Welcome, Gabriella, and thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you so much, Devin. Hello, everybody. My name is Gabriella, and I'm really excited to be talking with all of you today. The first thing I want to say is a big thank you to the Children in Nature Network for their commitment to this work, to Devin and Christy and AJ in particular for inviting me to speak. And I also want to thank everyone who is on this call today for taking the time to engage and learn about an increasingly more urgent topic, which is the impact of digital technologies on all of us, but of course, in particular, children. Um, I think this is a topic that it's not going to go away. It's going to change, but it takes conversations like this to get the ball rolling. You can go into the next. You can actually jump that slide as well. So what I'll talk about today is what exactly is abstinence, is the sort of the movement, the philosophy, and what is it not. And then from that, I will talk a little bit about my personal story. So why doing this work is so meaningful to me on a personal level, but of course also a professional investment as well. Um, and then I want to spend the bulk of today talking about the 5D method, which is really sort of the practical, boots on the ground advice that I would give, that we give to anyone who wants to be able to kind of step away from addictive technology, change their lifestyle in a way that's meaningful and sustainable. So I'll be taking questions as I'm going through that method, because it's, sort of rather long and can have quite a bit of information. So please feel free in the chat to drop any questions, and then Devin and Christy will facilitate those to me. And really ask any questions. There's nothing is off limits. Nice to meet you too. And then the last thing I'll talk about are phone alternatives, sort of very concrete examples of brands and personal devices that I recommend different people use for different purposes. I'll also disclaimer that I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. I have used each of these phones myself, and recommended it to people, and they've also loved it. So I'm hoping to share that with you guys. You can go into the next slide now. Okay. I think, is that the next slide? Maybe go back. I think it maybe skipped one slide. There's supposed to be a, okay. That's okay. Can you go back one slide then? It's weird. It's supposed to be one. Okay. So one thing I want to give as a little general kind of context to abstinence is that we're rather new. I founded this as a student organization when I was a graduate student. And so we're kind of sort of learning the ropes around how to talk about technology. And I think the sort of the carve out in the larger conversation around mental health and digital technologies that abstinence fills is really what can Gen Z tell us about what it was like to grow up online. There's a lot of information from, psychiatrists and from academics, but what can the first generation to grow up on what we now consider addictive technology tell us about the nuances of online life, so that we can sort of help that demographic, but also better inform parents who are worried about their teenage children and their young children as well. And if you can see on the left side of the abstinence logo, we have a cursor. And the reason that we use a cursor is sort of the undercurrent theme of the abstinence movement, which is agency, or the decision to make a choice around not just how you engage with the digital world, but your mind and your ability to relate with others in a way that is within your choice. And so the whole kind of issue with addictive technology is that especially increasingly younger people, children, are not having that choice of, getting a smartphone. Oftentimes their parents buy it for them, or their peers are pressuring them to do it, or they're not being sufficiently educated yet educated on the on what exactly it is they're consuming when they're scrolling on YouTube Shorts or on TikTok or on Instagram. And not having that sort of well-rounded education is definitely a drawback, but is something that now the older half of Gen Z can now kind of step up and discuss in a productive way. You can go to I can you can go back 2 slides to the map, the one that has the map. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit now about my sort of personal journey with sort of addictive technology and why I do this work. So I grew up very immersed in addictive technologies. I'm actually also, to make matters worse, I suppose, also from Silicon Valley as well. I was born in 2001. I'm 24 now. I got a iPod Touch when I was 9. I got a smartphone when I was 12, and sort of spent my adolescence online. I think so much of the memories that I have of growing up are all involve or really gravitate around technology, and specifically social media and smart technologies. And so another aspect of my work in this field is that I grew up in an atmosphere where people were really excited about technology. There was this sort of very intense, as many of you remember, a techno optimism really in that sort of early 2000s and into the 2010s around these technologies being what humanity has been waiting for, that it was going to sort of release us from our loneliness and finally connect human beings in the way that we've always desired. And if that was the case, I would not be here talking today. Another thing that I want to note is that the whole process in which I've gone since I started trying to kind of what started off as cutting back on technology sort of naturally came to the conclusion of abstinence. It wasn't the case that I sort of decided that there was this philosophy that I want to encourage, but I really started around the age of 14, kind of realizing that my sort of focus and feeling of attachment with others and connection was starting to be a bit fractured and sort of diluted. And so I would kind of go through all the different kind of solutions that are pretty common for us to hear. So I tried everything, really digital detoxes. I tried sort of deleting the apps off my phone and kind of and stopping there, trying to kind of like, trim down my accounts and that kind of stuff, and thinking that that was really enough. But what I didn't know at the time at being 14 was that these technologies were actually made specifically for my focus to be fractured. And they were also going to just get more addicting over time. So at the time when I was trying to get off these platforms, Instagram didn't yet have an algorithm. But then as I'm trying to get off of it, Instagram gets an algorithm. And then TikTok comes out, and then short form video starts to get adopted in all these platforms. And then right around when I kind of fully get off of the platforms is when AI companions come out. So that sort of, it wasn't just that I was struggling over a period of time, is that the actual problem was getting worse and harder as sort of the levels were going up. But that wasn't something that I noticed. It wasn't taught to me in any way. So that's really kind of the crux of this work is what would I have wished 13, 14-year-old me knew about what exactly I was getting into when I decided to have, say, an Instagram when I was 15. And then you can kind of go to the next slide. Um, so now to actually define what exactly is abstinence. Abstinence, a play on words between the word application and abstinence, is refraining from having personal social media accounts and instead using direct line communication like phone calls. So this is kind of the sort of more fancy speak for, say, for example, if I meet somebody and we want to keep in contact and they say, oh, hey, do you have an Instagram or TikTok? And I would say instead, no, I don't have that, but we can, you can have my phone number and then we can, maybe meet up for a coffee or something like that. It's sort of a much simpler, much more direct way of engaging with technology in a way that is outside of sort of algorithms and persuasive design, things like, autoplay, infinite scroll, and really all of the kind of bells and whistles that you have on your sort of typical social media platform. Speaking of defining social media as well, um, part of the kind of problem with defining social media is that it changes so quickly. And so there's sort of general loose definitions of or examples of one would consider social media. So that's what we use. So sort of things like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Reddit would be in there as well. And then there's ones that are kind of somewhat in the gray zone, things like Discord and WhatsApp. And then other platforms that are some in a sense interactive, but they're not social media in the sense of they're made to be super addicting. So things like Meetup, which really functions more like a community bulletin. If anyone here has used Meetup, you can go on meetup.com and take a look for yourselves. But really, the point is trying to use technology in a way that's sort of clutter free and using, in particular, technology that has also worked in the past. I think part of the issue with the young generation today is through no fault of our own, are just at an age where we don't have that context of how did my life work before it was sort of regularly automated and influenced by social media for several hours per day. You can jump to the next slide now. Okay, so to go back to the clicker, this is the clicker I was going to show earlier. I want to just run through a couple of statistics to kind of give us a general context of the problem here that abstinence is trying to solve. So there was a Gallup poll in 2023 that found that the average American teenager spends over 4 up to 5.8 hours a day on average on just social media. So that includes platforms like YouTube and TikTok. And this is just social media. So this is not even including, all screen time. So you can imagine that that Gen Z, and so this would be Gen Z, we don't just get extra hours in the day. We have to pull those hours from something else. So those would be things like sleep, exercise, face-to-face interaction. So the question then is, how is this impacting us? There's actually a Pew Research survey that was done earlier this year and released this year in April that found that nearly half of the teenagers sampled between the ages of 13 to 17, nearly half of them said that social media has more of a negative impact on them. That they spend too much time on social media, and nearly half of them found that social media has more of a negative impact on their peers. And so these numbers are actually higher than they were in the 2023 survey. So the issue is not just that teenagers feel like they're not having the agency, like we represent with our cursor here, or the control. It's the actual problem that they're dealing with is actually also getting worse. So really, what abstinence is here to do is not resign and say the fight against big tech is over and we just need to. It's not a resignation, but really a wise acknowledgement that there are going to be there are powers that are, there are technologies that are made not for your well-being, and that any sort of pleasure or convenience you might get out of them is really more of a byproduct of a larger sort of media ecosystem and design system that is made more so for exploitation than it is for your benefit. So we can jump to the next slide. Okay, so I want to run through a couple of the benefits of abstinence. This is not a comprehensive list, but sort of the main ones. And part of the reason why I felt so glad to come and talk with everyone today is that these are very directly related to the benefits of nature. So the first would be mental clarity and focus. We know that being in nature helps regulate your sympathetic nervous system, and so it helps with sort of stress reduction and sort of motion management. And it's the same way with getting off of platforms altogether, is that the platforms are made to pull you in as much as possible. The engineers of these platforms understand that certain negative emotions like anger and fear are very potent and can be sort of designed into what parts of the human brain different different elements of platforms are designed to exploit. So there's a lot of clarity and focus when you get off of them. The analog world just moves more slowly. And if you've noticed, if you go on any of these platforms, you can kind of cycle through the whole range of human emotion in just a couple of minutes, which is not something that naturally happens if you are just engaging in the real world. So that's kind of sort of a benchmark of how much the way that we use addictive technology actually sort of penetrating our consciousness. And the second is time well spent. They say that there's no such thing as time saved. There's just time well spent and time wasted. And that's the same as they found in the Pew Research survey. A lot of teenagers don't feel like they are having control over how much time they're spending, and the reason is the platforms are designed for you to lose your sense of control. And the third is understanding that so much of behavior change is environment over willpower. I think a lot of the solutions that are told to, especially young people, about how to cut back on your phone and social media usage really rely on more willpower. Sort of things like, taking a detox. When you take a detox, you still have the access to re-download the platform. So while you're detoxing, you're also trying to resist re-downloading it. And so across many different fields of behavioral science, they found that environment is significantly more important to behavior change than willpower. So an example would be if I'm trying to lose weight, it's much easier to just not keep a bag of cookies in the house than it is to keep them in the house and just try to tell myself, no, I'm not going to go into the kitchen and not going to open the pantry. The fourth is having a bit of perspective on technological advancement. I think in the age of AI in particular, this is particularly important because it's moving so quickly, and sort of the downside of, and as someone who grew up in Silicon Valley, the downside of growing up in an area that's sort of always pushing for more and faster technology is mindless adoption. And mindless adoption kind of got us in this predicament in the first place. So by actually sort of having that physical and mental distance from social media, it's easier to analyze its influence not just on yourself but your communities as well. And the last is closer relationships. As you can imagine, using direct line communication, you're having to be more effortful, more discerning, and more courteous around the maintaining your relationships, and also which ones you decide to maintain and why you maintain them. There's a lot of sort of effortlessness in maintaining relationships through social media that doesn't necessarily translate into actually feeling closer to the people that you care the most about. You can go to the next slide now. So I want to give a little overview of the 5D method. So what exactly is the 5D method? It's a high level comprehensive, and step-by-step guide to transition from mindless tech adoption to intentional tech usage. I want to emphasize that this is a high-level overview. So as I'm going through this, it's going to seem like a lot of information, but this method is supposed to be highly customizable. So if you want to go through it in 1 month, you can. If you decide that you want to take 6 months, you want to take 6 years. In my case, it sort of technically took, well, almost, I guess, 10 years from the very beginning to the end. I was kind of fumbling through with no guides, though, so that was why it was rather long. And what exactly is the goal of the 5D method is to quit social media and addictive technology altogether, but do so in a sustainable and meaningful way. And who is it for? It's really for anyone. Um, I think it's probably even more important the younger that you are. But um, the abstinence movement has people from all different age groups, all the different generations. So really, it's not just for young people, but perhaps that's the most urgent. And the last is how long does it take to go from beginning to end? Well, it's made to be personalizable, so that is entirely up to you. And it's not a race, and it's all for personal development. And like any kind of self-improvement journey, there'll be ebbs and flows and ups and downs that take you on all winding roads, but that is part of the process. You can go into the next slide now. Okay, so the 5D method overview, I want to go through just like what exactly are the 5Ds. The first kind of step we call step 00 is to prepare. Actually go through the different forms of preparation of what exactly does the 5D method, what is it going to take, and kind of setting a roadmap, so to speak. And the first step is to decrease your usage. The second is to deactivate your account. The third is to allow the account to delete. The fourth is to downgrade your phone. So this is assuming you're starting like with a smartphone and social media. And the last is depart, which is sort of a point of arrival in which you feel like you've sort of made it to the other side of paradise. You now have this distance between you and the digital world, and you can also act more intentionally as well. You can go to the next slide. Um, Okay, so one thing I want to discuss that's very important is sort of what is informing the 5D method. Sort of three main kind of tenets here. The first is what's called the immunity to change approach, which is an approach in behavioral adult developmental psychology developed by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So that's where I did my master's, and they developed after doing decades of research on adult development, what exactly does it take to change your behavior, and why do people not change their behavior? And so what they found is largely that we have what they call competing commitments, which are essentially goals that are in direct opposition with each other, but we are not aware of them. So say, for example, if I'm trying to quit scrolling on social media, I might have a commitment to having more time by not scrolling on social media, but I'm also committed to not being alone with my thoughts. And as you can see, spending less time on social media, you're going to be alone with your thoughts more. So having to sort through those two commitments is how you kind of weed out a more genuine and productive list of priorities as opposed to always kind of having conflicting feelings that allow you to self-sabotage. The second is addiction recovery science, in particular from the book Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke who's a psychiatrist at Stanford University. And in this book, she sort of talks about that the recovery window for the brain to kind of rewire and reset its, what she calls the reward pathways is not as short as a typical, say, digital detox might say. It's like, oh, take a break for a couple days and you'll feel better. It's actually quite closer to a month, and so that's sort of what we've built into the method. And the last, and the reason why this is sort of the largest one, is the lived experience of Gen Z. To define Gen Z, that were born between 1996 and 2012. So the youngest are roughly 13, 14, and the oldest are just short of 30. So you can imagine it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some of us are still kids, and some of us are having kids. So there's so much just rich information to learn from people who grew up on these platforms. So these all kind of got mixed together to build the 5D method. Okay, you can go to the next one. So the first step is to actually prepare. So this stuff is very important. You want to take your time with it. And on a piece of paper, you can answer these four questions. The first is why you want to leave social media. So things like I want to stop wasting time, I want to have a better, more regulated emotions, whatever it might be, you can list them all out. The second one is what are your fears with using technology or social media less? For example, some people say like I don't want to be, out of the loop. I don't want to be excluded from social events. It really can be really anything. It varies widely per person. The third is realistic analog activities and hobbies that you can do in a week. Keyword here is realistic. I think, especially if you consume content online about sort of quitting social media, a lot of them sort of paint this very romantic picture that suddenly you'll become fluent in a new language and get in perfect shape when in reality most of us are busy adults and have priorities and dependents and etc. And so what are realistic activities you can do, sort of things like reading, right? You can pick it up, it's portable, you can put it down whenever, or walking, you go for a walk around your block. It's sort of very low key, cost effective. And the last is writing down a list of people that you want to keep in touch with. So something that's important about this step is that abstinence is an opportunity not just to realize what relationships you want to maintain, but actually actively nurture certain relationships. And I think that is kind of a natural byproduct of realizing that your time is limited, really, and that you can't have an unlimited number of super best friends, which, for example, Snapchat giving you a best friends list makes you feel like you can sort of have a circulating list of best friends at all times. But reality is like what it takes to feel close to people. There are limited resources, time and effort and compassion. So they need to be sort of spent wisely. You can go to the next step now. So the next step is decrease, to actually decrease your use of these platforms. The first part, it's sort of two parts that work together in conjunction. The first is what we call the online you. So it's basically your sort of digital environment. And there's a couple things you can do here. The first is actually delete the apps from your smartphone and access them only through a browser. So this creates a physical distance as well in terms of like, all right, if I want to check this platform, I have to like go into the room that has my computer, for example. But it also creates a sort of emotional distance as well. That's like if your Instagram account is not always physically with you every time you leave the house with your smartphone, you're able to have longer periods in which you're not sort of being tethered to it. The second is to use, there's a lot of kind of software changes that are helpful, not by any means, in my opinion, as sort of be all end all solution, but they are helpful along the way. Using things like ad blockers and plugins to reduce unnecessary information. So Brave is an example of an ad-free browser. So I personally use that one. It gives me just the information I need and kind of cuts out the ads on the sides. Stay focused is sort of a form of a kind of screen time management. It allows you to block certain things on the computer, like YouTube recommendations and things like that. It also sort of helps you do, block certain websites that you kind of are always kind of gravitating towards. And the last one is Unhook, which is a plugin that allows you to just block all of the recommendations on YouTube. So 70% of YouTube traffic is not from things that people search, but from things that are recommended to you that you then click on, right? So that's kind of going back to the abstinence clicker is did I click on that video because I want to watch it, or did I just agree to watch it because it was served up to me? So Unhook allows you to have that distance that if I go on YouTube, I would have to look up a specific thing and select that video, and it wouldn't be then fed to me. By the way, I personally use all of these, not sponsored. They're also all free. They all work perfectly. Highly recommend. The last thing you can do is also unfollow and remove or block any fluff. So that would be things like, ads, kind of influencers trying to sell you things, anything that has like rage bait, clickbait. Typically, you can tell what is kind of getting your emotions stirred up. And the second part is I would argue in some part more important, which is the real world you, is like how are you actually becoming more relevant in the real world? So it's one thing, of course, to get off of social media, right? But if you say, for example, I'm sure there's parents watching, you tell your kid, okay, you don't get to be on Instagram anymore. But if you don't give them an alternative to being on Instagram, it's going to be an endless battle, right? So the real world you, there's sort of three main steps we suggest. The first is to slow down. I think a lot of the content online around unplugging sort of makes it seem like it'll make us like instantly hyper productive and super cool and awesome. Um, but really, the target for abstinence is really just to slow down. And that's part of the reason we tell people to take on realistic analog activities because you can imagine if you're suddenly signing up for a class 3 days a week for some hobby you want to get into, that it just adds more to your plate and you're not actually first slowing down. The second one is to displace. It's much easier to reduce your TikTok screen time, let's say, instead of by fighting TikTok, but by displacing it and making it sort of redundant by engaging in the real world. So part of the reason that teenagers in particular, right, are so hooked on social media is it does give you something. It does, provide you a certain amount of information and things that are happening and whatever. If you're able to displace those things and still get what social media would have given you, but in the real world, it's considerably easier to step away from them. And the last one, only then at this point really do hobbies come in, right? So like hobbies, things like, I don't know, a new sport that you want to take up, for example, right? Um, it realistically like being an adult, like, there's just so many moving parts, and so having sort of an extensive or complicated hobby is unrealistic for a lot of people. I think just between going to work, taking care of your family and yourself, and slowing down as well, and doing things more intentionally. There's very little time actually at the end of that for hobbies. Of course, over time you increasingly have a little bit more time, but in particular at the beginning, be careful about taking on sort of more dramatic hobbies, let's say. Okay, you can go to the next one now. The next one is to deactivate. So this is going back to the research from Dr. Anna Lemke, where so social media platforms give you like a 30-day deactivation window, meaning if I were to have an Instagram and I deactivated it, it wouldn't delete until 30 days are over. So in those 30 days, I can always reactivate it. So when I was trying to get off of social media, just getting through those 30 days, I remember was like the thorn in my side was I know that if I can get through these 30 days and the account erases, then I'll stay off of it. But if I know that my social capital really is all just one login away, it's so much harder. So continuing by engaging the real world and then you can then deactivate one account, which is the account that you use the least. The point is to kind of like reduce the number of places that you get all this sort of excess stimulus from. So it might not feel like a lot of things are changing at this point because naturally you say you delete, I don't know, Snapchat that you only use twice a week. You're going to spend more time, or Facebook, let's say, on other platforms. But the point is to not sort of be surrounded by so many different ways to access addictive technology. Um, and then you can go to the next one after this. Okay, and then the fourth D is to actually delete. So this is sort of a passive step. Like I said, at the end of the 30 days, at the end of 30 days, the account just sort of naturally deletes. And so the kind of ideal cycle of this is that you decrease your use, you strip down your technology, you've put in the right ad blockers, you figure out what you're going to do to spend your time, you're taking up, you're slowing down, calling people more, seeing people in real life, and then you deactivate one account that you use the least and then let those 30 days go through. You'll probably have some withdrawal symptoms, but as they found in addiction recovery, it's around those 30 days, that 30-day window, that you started to kind of come out of that and can rewire your reward pathways. And then at the end of that 30 days, the account will sort of automatically delete. So in this delete stage, you kind of just go through that cycle until your last account is gone. Um, and I want to reiterate this, I know I've said this already, but take your time. If Facebook is really that one account that you just can't delete, don't just try to force it in 30 days. If it takes you 6 months to do it, take the 6 months. If it takes 1 year to do it, take the whole year. You can go to the next slide now. You can, okay. Okay, so the fourth D, second to last D, is to actually downgrade your phone. So I always suggest to people to get what is called a transition device. I'm not sure if people here are familiar with the phrase dumb phone, but it's basically the opposite of a smartphone. So it's like a flip phone, basically. There's a one device in the middle called a transition device, which is basically a device that is smarter than a dumb phone, but it's not quite a full smartphone either. But it is perfect for transition, right? So, for example, myself, I was absolutely terrified of the idea of not having a smartphone after being fully dependent on it for 10 years. And so I got a transition device and would carry that with my iPhone, and then the sort of psychological change that I needed to kind of adjust to, and then eventually I would just carry just the phone by itself, and I didn't need to have the iPhone with me as a security blanket. And this phrase down here, what we call de-entrenchment. So de-entrenchment is sort of like a theme, or it's basically if your whole life has been kind of shaped around your smartphone and social media, it's going to take more adjustment than just knowing what kind of phone to use and what platforms to use. There's like very subtle ways that our lives are kind of shaped by algorithms and shaped by these technologies that we might not notice, and you kind of can't really preemptively kind of predict them at the beginning before you start this process. Sometimes they just come up so naturally. So, for example, for me, since I don't carry my smartphone with me, something so simple like where I write my grocery list, I had to realize like, okay, I have to actually just write it on a post-it note instead of write it on my phone. Sort of like these like very small things that we use our phones for that we don't realize that we use it for, and being patient with ourselves and giving us the time to actually de-entrench our lives. I think an image that kind of might make this a bit clearer is if you've ever seen a tree that has kind of grown around something, right? If you suddenly remove the thing it's grown around, it still kind of keeps that shape. And over time, with correction, the tree can then grow straight. But just by removing the thing it's growing around doesn't instantly sort of make the tree um, change shape. It sort of has grown and formed itself around that thing, if that helps. You can go into the next one. And the last D is when you finally start to feel like you have that distance between you and the digital world. Um, this is the point that arrives differently for everyone. I think some people get to it really quickly. Some people it takes forever. I think it's largely dependent on age, to be honest. I think so. For example, with an older client that I would have, that feeling of like, oh, that release, that freedom, is familiar to them because they grew up and went through most of their adolescence, if not all of it, without there even being smartphones, right? Or they, Facebook didn't come out until they graduated from college, let's say. But with people more in Gen Z, my generation, it's from as your earliest memories are so engaged, and so it's sort of seeing for a lot of Gen Z like the first time that you felt like there's been a distance between you and the digital world, and that you can much more consciously delineate between what is the real world and what is the digital world. But yes, that's the end of the 5D method. If you can go into the next slide now. So the last thing I want to talk about today are phone alternatives. So very concretely, what do I recommend? So as I mentioned before, in terms of transition devices, this is the phone I've recommended time and time again to people, and everyone seems who has got it seems to love it. Oh yes, I want to stop for questions. I'm sorry about that, I forgot. Any questions about the 5D method? If anyone can drop it in the chat. Um,
None have come in yet. Oh, Jenny asks, what about email?
Email is a very good one. I think email in some ways is becoming a sort of a thorn for people who are kind of off. They're off social media, but they complain about email. Because email is necessary to have for work purposes. I think what weighs the most or has the biggest impact with email is what I was going to talk about is changing the type of phone you have so that you're not always having email with you, and then making it that where you access your email is in one fixed place. So for example, email would probably be the biggest annoyance for me personally. So I don't have email accessible on any device that I take when I'm out and about. And then when I actually access email, it's just in the one physical place in my house to access it. In a more ideal situation, I would have a place of work, but because I work remotely, I have it inside of my house. The biggest one I would say is definitely not having it on your smartphone, but part of not having it on your smartphone is not using a smartphone as well. How do you work around business that require a cashless payment? Oh, let me see. How do you work around businesses slash events that require cashless payment? What's the workaround for Apple Pay, Venmo, etc.? So in those situations, I this is part of the de-entrenchment sort of philosophy here, which is part of de-entrenchment is realizing what you need to bring when you need to bring it. So for example, if I'm going to the grocery store, I know that it's very unlikely that I'll need my smartphone there because I will pay with like tap my credit card. So then I won't need it. But say I go to a farmer's market and I know they don't only accept sort of cashless payment, I would either use my card or in certain instances I will carry my smartphone with me. So I don't recommend to people, like when you switch to a dumb phone or, a transition phone, that you actually get rid of your smartphone. I think it has great uses. I use it to take high quality photos. I use it to store photos. And when I'm actually going to some event or something where I know that I might need it, I'll just bring it with me and then I hotspot it to my other phone. So right now I don't use my transition phone anymore. And I have just one SIM card. It's not like two numbers or anything. I have just the one SIM card. And then when I know if I needed to use this phone, then I would bring it with me. But in your sort of my daily routine, learn pretty quickly, right? Like what is it? When is it that you'll need the smartphone and when you might not need it? And then over time you just get adjusted and then you'll have it when you need. Um, so I hope that answers your questions in cashless payment. It's sort of, I mean, it's not just payment, but more generalizable to when would you need the smartphone for certain things. So I used to kind of think that I would need mobile deposit, but then I realized that there's rarely is ever so urgent, and it has never been the case where I couldn't have waited till I got home to do a mobile deposit, for example. Regarding the methodology, do you have data metrics on the successes for people who have gone through it? No, we do not yet, but we hope to soon because we're rather new. This method, the people that we have used it with, so we run a coaching program called Digital Lifestyle Planning, which is sort of a one-on-one coaching program for people who are trying to figure out their relationship with technology and who are, scrolling on their phone in bed when they want to be doing other things. So it's relatively new. So we do want to at some point have, white papers and research behind it. But from the feedback that we have gotten from people has been very positive. And also the 5D method as well is something that also has been changing over time since, like I said, it is relatively new. So with, for example, every new client that we take on in our coaching program, we learn something new. I think that's the reason why the largest block in the methodology is the lived experience of Gen Z. There's so much about our lived experience that is not covered in any research and is not being asked in sort of current or soon to be research questions. Yeah, but there's just a kind of a larger hole in the available research, but hopefully very soon. Any advice for someone who has to use social media for work? I often have to make Instagram posts, etc., for my company, and then find myself sucked into the app. That is a very good point. So I want to clarify about abstinence that there's really good uses for social media for running businesses, things like that. So really, abstinence came from, is when people pick up on it, it's really for what most people use social media regularly for, which is like kind of personal entertainment or connection, things like that. So abstinence is really kind of outside of the domain of work. However, the 5D method is applicable to people who kind of get sucked in. So, we'll have people who are social media managers and they kind of naturally get sucked into social media. So part of it is separating out professional and personal. So one thing is what's pretty common now is the all-in-one idea of the smartphone, which is I have my smartphone and then I have these apps that are for work on here and then I have another block that's apps for personal. But what you've done now is you're not having a folder for personal, folder for professional. Now, because you're going to always feel inclined to answer your email, for example, your phone, your work phone and your personal phone are now just all one. And now work is going to trump personal. So now you find yourself checking email during dinner and then all these different things. So you have to separate the using, along the lines of the hardware, separate out the technology. So instead of saying like, oh, but I'm just going to use just this app on my phone, you have to either get a separate phone or make those kinds of that degree of separation. And I wouldn't consider that an overcorrection at all because these technologies are incredibly powerful, let me remind you. So to have, say, a separate phone for work and make that investment, or have a separate computer or tablet you use for work things that is kept either at work and you do it just when you're at a time and place when you should be working. is part of the necessary system to maintain these boundaries. Um,
There was also one question above that says, what do you use as an alternative to GPS?
to GPS. Okay, that's a very good question. So one thing is on these devices. So for example, the transition device, um, I can talk about this a little bit more detail. The Cat S22 Flip runs Android, so it's still technically considered a smartphone. It's just in a flip phone form factor, so it's like slow to scroll, and it's also so small that you really don't want to do it. So I've never scrolled on this or felt like I really could. So this one, it has maps though. So if I were, say, walking around town or driving somewhere, I could just pull up maps on here. And like regular, Waze or Google Maps or whatever, I could use this one, so it still has it. Um, Thomas Guide still makes books and maps. Yes, there's also analog systems you can use as well. So you can also get a dashboard GPS. I know that Garmin makes a good dashboard GPS if you want to buy a separate device for your car as well. But the light phone is this other phone I wanted to talk about, which is the one I use currently right now. This also has GPS or directions on it, but it's more just like a list. So it'll give me, so for example, if I'm trying to go somewhere, I can just type in the address and then it'll give me a list of the steps. And it's if it's in my city where I live, one is generally familiar with the general direction. It's really just the smaller details, but it'll have it on here. And the list will also change as you're getting closer to the destination. So it's not that sort of turn by turn in the sense I can just like prop it up and then read it and then it'll tell me right when I need to make the immediate turn. But it's more so just gives you a like 80% of the way direction, and then the rest of it, you do have to pay attention to where it is that you're going. This is part of the de-entrenchment, though, because I think there is, GPS is a classic case of where we really rely on technology. But there's other ways to still use the technology as a tool, but not become so reliant, where, for example, you're not really learning where it is that you're going or becoming familiar with the streets of, say, your city, but rather taking the moment before you leave the house to actually actively prepare for where it is you're going by, say, what I tend to do is I'll either just pull it up on the light phone or I'll write it on a sticky note and then or if I'm walking somewhere, sometimes I just write on the back of my hand if it's not that many steps. Um, but typically, I think in general, like longer commutes that we have to make, you get more familiar because it's like to work or, a relative's house or their grocery store. Um, and for any of the questions I've answered, by the way, if you need a follow-up question, please definitely drop it in there. Um, what about, okay. I think that's
All the questions for now.
all the questions. Um, Yes, if anyone has any more questions, the last thing I want to talk about are just like the basic flip phones, which are this is actually the first one that I tried. And one thing I really, really want to recommend to people when switching your phone is stay in the transition stage much longer than just jumping to the end. I think one can get very excited, understandably, about being like, I'm going to be free from my smartphone. And then you kind of jump too directly to say a regular flip phone when you haven't gone through the de-entrenchment process and haven't allowed for all the different kind of aspects of the lifestyle to adjust. And it can be very jarring and it can kind of like scare you and be like, no, I'm not going to do this. And you just go back to your smartphone, which happens to me, happens to my friends as well. Um, and then, oh, also in terms of cost, in terms of like phone plans and stuff like that, the cat is locked to T-Mobile. So for this one, I would use a prepaid phone plan. The nice thing about not using a traditional smartphone is the amount of data that you use is so much less that you can actually, for the most part, get off of like a unlimited plan or whatever high amount of data most plans have. And then I'm actually on a prepaid line, so it's like 2 or 3 gigabytes per month, which is perfectly sufficient for my needs now. And it's about $15 a month. I went from paying almost 40 a month to about 15. Also, in terms of the cost of all these phones, all three of these together cost considerably less than just my one iPhone. Even though, and there's a very wide range market now for sort of not non-smartphones. So this is by no means a comprehensive list. Kind of just a cursory search online of dumb phones that you can pull up, like the Gab phone, you can pull up the Balance phone. There's a lot of different ones that people use, but I would say these are definitely the most popular, let's say. Um, but yes, I really want to note that patience is very important with this process, and taking the time to make the adjustment. I feel like it's such a moment of relief to feel freed from, sort of always being hooked to your phone and social media. But the flip side of that is you also then need the patience to move away from it and build your social capital outside of the attention economy, really. If you want to go to one more slide after, I think I just have a little cursor. So I'll just leave that in case anyone has any more questions. Um, Sure, another question from Devin. Can you talk to us about the future of abstinence? What do you see as goals for you and your team for the future, or how are you thinking about anticipating the evolving threats? That is a great question, and we've definitely been actively thinking about this. It was related to a question someone asked before, sort of like what is the data on sort of the efficacy for the 5D method. So I'll give a background in terms of the research, which is there's been kind of flawed research done in the past around like sort of abstention from social media, and but a lot of those studies didn't allow for a proper period, which is why the 5D method is sort of based on 30 days for one to actually feel the benefits of not of sort of disengaging from social media. So it'll be like, a couple days detox or a week, but as you can imagine, if the only way you talk to people is through social media and that's where you entertain yourself, one can understand how it can be a very jarring transition to then just suddenly be off of it. So I think encouraging more sufficient research in the specific realm of building your entire life outside of the attention economy, not trying to kind of win that battle, so to speak. How does that actually influence well-being? Speaking of the future of abstinence, we've just recently started a program called Office Hours, which I would love to talk about right now. If anyone has any questions, we host Zoom calls twice a week. They're totally free. You can come in. They're office hours, so come in, ask your questions, and come and go as you please. And you can come in and talk to the team about anything related to unplugging. So maybe you tried a new phone and you don't know how it works, or what should I do about this feature or that feature, or like, how should I spend my time, or how do I meet people? Any questions related to unplugging, come and ask. And there's other people in the call who are on the same journey as you, have questions about email and work and everything. And the second question is, how are you thinking about anticipating or the evolving threats? Right. So one of the things we're going through right now is sort of figuring out how our sort of public statement on specifically AI companions. I want to delineate that abstinence kind of really is like our concern is really on the side of social media as it pertains to intimacy and personal relationships. So as we all know, AI is a huge field. Like there's AI for, finance, for medicine, for everything. So we're really invested in like how AI companions and this idea of building an emotional relationship with AI. So that's the next big step because, as technology changes, we want to make sure that we are up to scruff with what young people are doing. Have you heard of any good landline style phones? I think I'm getting a house phone for my family. I actually just got a landline recently because it came with the internet package for my house. Any good landline style phones? The ones that doctors' offices use, I think are perfectly good. They're honestly, I used to work like in my parents' office and they have landlines for the business. All that they're fairly comparably. I don't think that you were really at a loss for you picking any one brand over the other. I think the idea of a landline is also quite nice. Um, what else? If you want particular brands, I don't think I have any particular brands off the top of my head, but like I said, they work very similarly and they're very reliable. Um, could you pronounce your name slowly, please? Yeah, Gabriella is my first name, and then Nguyen is my last name, but you can just say Nguyen, like Win, to like to win something. That works as well. Um, and then let's see. If anyone has any more questions, um, I will actually drop my email here in case anyone wants to send me an email about questions or, uh, oops. I'll drop an email here so if anyone has any questions. Whoops. Please feel free to email me. I would love to answer your questions, and also feel free to please sign up for office hours. I think in part we want to help anyone who has any questions, but also we want to learn also about like there's just so much experience, lived experience to be learned about, to learn about and learn from of all different generations. So please come share your experiences with other people. Um, let's see.
Gabriella, Devin here. I just wanted to ask you, I know previously we had talked, you'd mentioned that there are a number of folks who are adopting the movement and folks wanting to then connect with other people who are adopting it. And you and your team had talked about maybe supporting a way for folks to connect in the future um, offline who adopted the abstinence movement. Is that something you're still considering? I think you mentioned kind of like a pen pal sort of style. Can you talk a little bit about like once folks have moved off social media and still wanting to connect with other folks and making friends, right? But not necessarily joining another online community. What does that sort of look like, or what are the plans that your team has discussed?
Right. So one of the ideas, as Devin was saying, was we were exploring sort of a pen pal situation where if you wanted to connect with one person and really invest in that relationship and go through the abstinence journey together, that would be that's a program we could set up. One thing we were thinking in terms of might be more effective to get more effective to just establish maybe more, I guess, like active relationships. Because I think with pen pals, sometimes you can kind of like fade away, I think, a little bit, is through office hours. And the reason we call it office hours and not like the meeting we have twice a week is it's really like to come and ask questions. And then outside of those, you can then exchange emails, exchange phone numbers. And of course, we tell people, don't add each other on Instagram, for example, but come and then come into the office hours not with the idea that you're just kind of here to hang out, but you're here to actually, have a productive conversation and help other people. I think we were thinking maybe that might be a better way for people to also kind of get a vibe almost. I think with people, I think if we're matching people and we haven't met them ourselves, we're maybe a little bit iffy about that. But if, you have two moms coming into office hours regularly and then they realize that their kids are the same age and they learn that through sharing their stories, that might actually be a softer landing to introduce people to one another.
Thank you.
It also seems like people are having technical troubles with the office hours sign up form, but um
Interesting, really. It was working this morning. That's odd. If
but
it
I'm sure that you'll just take a look at it and I'll be sure to include it with the post event email.
yes. Okay. Yeah,
Thank you
definitely do
so
that. I will take a
much.
look at that. Sorry about that, guys. I'll look into that.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. I'm just thinking about how just this is like an addiction, right? And so having the methods and like the breakdown and the patience and the process is super key for moving folks off of screens. It also makes you kind of think twice about whether when you meet someone and they're sort of say like, "Oh, are you on the internet?" When really it's like, well, is this a person you want to spend time with? So you can say, actually, no, here's my number, right? So you think twice about just like adding them kind of blindly. I really just appreciate your insights here and thank you everyone for being here and your thoughtful questions. And as Gabriella said, she's available later for answering any future questions, and those office hours will be a great resource. Be on the lookout for more events and programs from the Children in Nature Network. You can subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss them. We'll drop a link in the chat to the newsletter, and we'll send a recording out in the next 2 weeks of this webinar, and it'll be made available on our website as well. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Gabriella.